That structure comes down by Friday, or we have it torn down for you and bill the lot." That was Diane Talley, president of the Pinewood Ridge Homeowners Association for 9 years running, standing on my gravel with a clipboard and a face like a closed gate. The structure she meant was my shed. The lot she meant was mine, 4.5 acres on the high side of the ridge that I had owned outright since before her cul-de-sac existed. She had decided my workshop was illegal. She had decided a lot of things about my land without ever once reading the deed. What she did not know was that I had spent 31 years as a county building inspector before I retired, that I had pulled and closed the permit on that shed myself, and that the clubhouse her board was so proud of had been built 2 summers earlier on a slab I had personally flagged as out of compliance and never signed off on. She thought she was looking at a stubborn old man with an eyesore. She was looking at the one person on that ridge who knew exactly what a final inspection meant and exactly what it cost to skip one. So tell me, if a woman with a clipboard told you to tear down the building you had every right to keep, what would you have done with what you knew? My name is Walter Brandt. I am 63 years old. For most of my working life, I drove a county truck out to job sites across 2 valleys and checked whether what people built matched what the code allowed. And I learned early that the loudest person on a site is almost never the one holding the paper that matters. The men who shouted at me from the tops of their half-framed houses were always the ones who had skipped a step. The ones who stood quiet by the foundation with a folder under their arm had usually done it right. I made a habit of being the second kind in my work and in my life. And the habit is the reason I am able to tell you this story instead of telling you how I lost. I bought the ridge parcel in 1991, back when the road up to it was dirt and the nearest neighbor was a cattle lease. 4.5 acres on the high side, with the slope falling away to the south and the whole valley laid out below it like something you could pour into a cup. My wife, Carol, and I built the house ourselves over 4 years of weekends. I poured the footings and she ran the level and told me when I was off, because I was off more than I like to admit. She picked the spot for the porch so it would catch the afternoon light coming off the valley. And she was right, the way she was right about most things. I argued for the other corner. She walked me out at 4 in the afternoon in October and made me stand where she wanted the rail to go and feel the light come up the slope and warm the side of my face. And that was the end of the argument. Carol passed 5 years ago, in the spring, when the light was just starting to come back long again. The porch still catches that light. I still sit in it. We raised one son out there, and after he moved east, I figured the place would go quiet and stay that way. Then my granddaughter Nora came to live with me. Her mother, my son's ex, had a hard stretch, and the arrangement that was supposed to last a summer turned into 3 years and counting. Nora is 16 now. She came to me at 13 with a backpack and a duffel and a way of looking at a room like she was counting the exits, and it took the better part of a year before she stopped flinching when a door closed too hard. She is the reason the house still has noise in it. She's also the reason I keep careful records of everything, because I learned a long time ago that careful records are how a calm man protects the people who depend on him. And I had someone depending on me again. The shed was not new. I poured the footing the spring after Carol died, partly because I needed something to do with my hands during the hours that used to belong to her, and partly because I had promised her I would finally build a proper place for the tools that had been living under a tarp for a decade. She had nagged me about that tarp for 15 years. Every spring it came off rotted at the grommets, and every fall I patched it. And she would stand at the kitchen window with her coffee and shake her head at me. So the spring after she was gone, I drove down to the county office and pulled the permit, at the counter where half the clerks still knew me by name. And a woman named Patty, who had processed paper for me for 2 decades, slid the card across and said she was sorry about Carol and that the new shed had better be square, I told her it would be. I built it to code because building to code is simply how I build. And because a man who spent his life red-tagging other people's shortcuts does not get to take any of his own. I set the footings below the frost line. I spaced the rebar by the book. 48 hours after the framing went up, I had a colleague come do the rough inspection. And when it passed, I closed the permit myself and filed the signed card in a manila folder labeled with the parcel number. The way I have filed every document tied to that land since the day I bought it. That card mattered later more than I could have known when I filed it. Most things in that folder did. Pinewood Ridge came later. A developer bought the old cattle lease below me around 2009 and put in 40-some houses on quarter-acre lots. All of them downhill, all of them inside an association with covenants and a board and a monthly newsletter. My 4.5 acres were never part of it. The plat that created their subdivision drew its boundary along the old fence line at the bottom of my slope. And my parcel sat above that line on its own older deed, recorded decades before anyone drew a single Pinewood lot. I knew this because I had read it. Reading the paper is the entire job. For a few years, they left me alone. Then Diane Talley became president, and the newsletter started running little items about ridgeline aesthetic continuity and the importance of every property reflecting the community standard. I was not a property in her community. She decided I should be anyway. The first contact was a letter. It came on a Tuesday in early spring, printed on association letterhead, informing me that my outbuilding was in violation of Covenant Section 4 and that I had 30 days to submit a remediation plan. I read it twice. Then I drove down to the county and pulled the recorded plat and my own deed, made copies, and started a new folder. On the front, I wrote the date and the words first notice. That was Incident 1. I did not answer the letter because there was nothing to answer. You do not submit a remediation plan to a board that has no jurisdiction over your dirt. A week later, Diane came up the road in person. She drove a white SUV with a vanity plate and a magnet on the door that said, Pinewood Ridge, HOA, in gold letters she had clearly paid for herself. She wore a magenta blazer over yoga pants and white sneakers that had never seen gravel. And she carried the clipboard the way some men carry a badge, tucked against the ribs with one arm wrapped over it. She parked at the bottom of my drive, looked up at the house, and did not come any farther, because the gravel was not kind to the sneakers. She called up that she was conducting a compliance walkthrough and needed access to inspect the structure. I came down halfway, far enough to talk, not far enough to make it easy. I was holding a coffee mug. I did not put it down. You don't have authority on this parcel, I told her. This ridge is functionally part of our jurisdiction, she said. She said it the way you would explain a simple thing to a slow child. Whether your paperwork agrees or not, the community has standards. And that shed of yours is an eyesore that affects every home's value below you. I have homeowners calling me Mr. Brandt. Real homeowners, with real concerns about what they have to look at every morning. Then they can look at it, I said. It's permitted, it's square, and it's on my land. You're welcome to the view from the road. She wrote something on the clipboard, fast and hard, the way people do when they want you to know you are being written down. Then she got back in the SUV and backed down the road too quickly, spraying a little gravel. And I noticed she had not asked to see a single piece of my paperwork. She had told me what my paperwork said without reading it. That is the whole of her, right there in one visit, functionally part of our jurisdiction. I wrote that phrase down word for word that evening, because in 31 years of inspections, I had learned that people who say functionally are about to do something the actual rules do not allow. The word is a confession dressed as a claim. That was Incident 2. I want to be plain about something here because it matters for the rest of the story. I did not hate Diane Talley. I have met 100 Dianes on 100 job sites. People who confuse being in charge of a thing with being right about it. And most of them are not cruel, just incurious. The trouble starts when incuriosity gets a budget. And Diane, it turned out, had a budget, and a reason to spend it that had nothing to do with my shed. That reason was named Greg Talley, her husband, and Greg owned the company that had built Pinewood Ridge in the first place. He had a second phase planned, 20 more lots, and the only buildable approach to that second phase ran along the bottom of my slope, across the old fence line, through a strip of ground he needed and did not own. I did not know all of this in the spring. I learned it in pieces over the following year, the way you learn anything true, slowly and from more than one source. The shape of it was there from the start, though, if you knew where to look, and looking is the job. The fines began in May. A notice taped to my gate said I owed $250 for the ongoing violation, with a like amount to accrue each month until the structure was removed. I photographed the notice where it hung, photographed it again in my hand with the date written on a card beside it, peeled it off the gate, and filed it. Incident 3. In June, a second notice doubled the figure and added a line about the association reserving the right to place a lien on the property, which it could no more do than it could place a lien on the moon. Incident 4. In July, there were 2 notices in 1 week. By the end of summer, the paper taped to my gate claimed I owed the association just under $3,000 for the crime of keeping a permitted shed on land that was not theirs. I never paid a cent of it, and I never argued about it because you do not argue with a number that has no legal weight. You write down the date you found it and you put it in the folder. By Labor Day, the folder was an inch thick and I had started a second one. Nora started keeping her own version without me asking. She is sharper than I was at her age, and she does not miss things. She set up an old phone on the kitchen windowsill that looked straight down the drive, propped on a coffee can with a bit of folded cardboard to get the angle right. And any time the white SUV came up the road, it recorded, and the file copied itself to a second drive in my office automatically, because she set that up too. I did not know a 16-year-old could do that. She showed me the folder on the office computer where the copies landed, named by date, and explained it twice until I understood it. "Just so there's 2 of everything, Grandpa," she said. "You always say 2 copies." The first time she said it, I had to look out the window for a minute so she would not see my face, because that was a thing I said. And she had been listening, and Carol used to listen like that too, and hand my own words back to me when I needed them. I told her it was good work. She shrugged like it was nothing. It was not nothing. The day and time stamp on those videos became the spine of the whole record. Tuesday, 9:40 in the morning. Thursday, 4 in the afternoon. Saturday, just after lunch. Each one another step, each one named and filed, each one waiting. In September, the man with the fake clipboard showed up. He came on a Wednesday in a pickup with no markings, wearing a polo shirt with a little embroidered shield on the chest, and he walked right up the drive to the shed like he owned the path. He told me he was performing a structural safety inspection on behalf of the association and the county jointly, and he said it with the flat confidence of a man who had said it before and not been challenged. "On behalf of the county," I said. "Show me your county identification." He patted his shirt pocket and his back pocket and came up with nothing, because there was nothing to come up with. He was not from the county. He was a handyman named Dale who did rough work on Greg Talley's sites, and the shield on his shirt was the kind you order online for $19. And I knew that because I had spent 3 decades around the real thing, and the real thing does not look like that. "You're not an inspector," I said. "You're a man in a shirt." You can look at the outside of my shed from the public road, same as anyone. You set one boot past that gate without a warrant, and I am calling the actual sheriff. And then you and whoever sent you can explain to a deputy why you told a retired county inspector you were here on county authority. Something moved behind his face when I said retired county inspector. He had not known that. He got back in the truck and left, and he did not spray gravel, he just left. The way a man leaves when he has realized he is standing in the wrong yard. I logged it. Incident 7. And the first one that crossed from rude into something with a legal edge. Because impersonating a county inspector is not a covenant matter. It is a crime. And I knew exactly which statute it sat under and exactly how a prosecutor would charge it. That was also the week I called the sheriff's office myself, not to report anything yet, but to put a marker down. The deputy who came out was named Ray Soto, a steady younger man, maybe 35, who had grown up 2 valleys over and knew the country and knew how to stand on a porch without filling it up. He took off his hat at the door, which told me something. He looked at the folder and the videos and listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which is rarer than it should be. And when I was done, he was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "Here's the hard part," Ray said. "A filed complaint, even a junk one, we have to respond to. That's the law, and I can't get around it, and I won't lie to you and say I can. I can't make them stop filing. What I can do is tell you that a pattern matters. You keep doing exactly what you're doing. Dates, photos, 2 copies. You build me a documented pattern. Enough separate incidents that a judge can see the shape of the thing instead of just one neighbor's word against another. And this stops being your problem and starts being theirs." "How many is enough?" I asked. "More than a handful," he said. "I can't give you a number because a judge won't give me one either. You'll know it, though, when the folder's heavy. So will I. And when somebody put a fake badge on and walked up your drive, that one's not a covenant squabble. That one's mine. You write down everything you can remember about him before you forget it. I want you to notice what he did and did not do. Because it matters, and because the niche of people who tell these stories online get it wrong half the time. He did not take a side. He did not call Diane a name or promise me anything or wink at me about how he would handle it off the books. He told me the rule he was bound by, and the threshold that would change things, and the one piece that was already a crime. And then he left it to the paper. That is what a constrained officer looks like. And it is a better thing to have on your side than a friend with a grudge. I filed his card in the folder too. The fall was quieter, which I should have read as a held breath. The fines kept coming, and I kept filing them. Nora turned 16 and got her permit and started driving the truck up and down our own road for practice. And Diane sent a letter complaining that an unlicensed driver was operating a vehicle in the community, which was wrong on 2 counts because Nora had her permit and our road is not in the community. I filed that one almost gently. Incident 11. Then, in October, I found out what the whole thing was actually about, and the temperature changed. I was at the county office pulling a copy of something unrelated, a road maintenance record, when a clerk I had known for 20 years slid a second folder across the counter and said, half under her breath, without quite looking at me, "You'll want to see what your neighbors filed." Patty again. She had been there long enough to know which papers were public record and which ones a man would want to see before they became somebody's problem. It was a preliminary plat application for Pinewood Ridge Phase 2, submitted by Tally Development, Greg's company. 20 new lots drawn in tidy rows where the cattle lease used to run. And the access road for the whole phase, the only road that worked with the grade, was drawn crossing the strip of ground at the bottom of my slope. The strip that sat below the old fence line. The strip that was on my deed and not theirs. They had drawn a road across land they did not own and submitted it to the county as if the ownership question were already settled. Or as if it soon would be, once the stubborn old man on the ridge gave up his eyesore and, with it, the will and the standing to object to anything. I stood at that counter and felt the whole year rearrange itself behind my eyes. The shed was never the point. The shed was a lever. If they could bury me in fines and fake inspectors and make my life small enough and tired enough, maybe I would sell. Or maybe I would just stop paying attention. And either way, the strip they needed would come loose. The fines were not about a shed. They were about a road. Diane was not protecting anyone's property value. She was clearing a path for her husband's lots, one notice at a time, and she had probably told herself it was about community standards, right up to the moment she signed the complaint. Because that is the kind of thing a person tells herself when the truth would require her to read something. I sat in the truck in the county lot for a long while with that plat on the seat beside me, watching people come and go from the building where I had spent my whole career. Then I went back inside and made 3 copies before I left, because by then I owned only one religion, and its sacrament is the photocopy. I added the plat to the folder. I did not call a lawyer in anger. I did not drive down to Greg's office. I drove home, and I told Nora only that I had figured out why, and that we were going to keep doing exactly what we had been doing, just more carefully. She nodded like she had expected it. Then she went and checked that the second drive was backing up. The winter brought the lawsuit, and just before it, the last time Diane ever spoke to me on my own ground. She came up the road one cold afternoon in December, parked at the bottom as always, and did not get out. Just rolled the window down and called up the slope with the engine running. "I'll give you one more chance to be reasonable," she called. "We don't want to take you to court, Mr. Brandt. This community will not be held hostage, though, by one man who thinks his little dirt road puts him above the rules everyone else follows. That ridge is part of Pinewood, functionally and morally, and a judge is going to see it that way even if you won't. There's no judge in this county who hasn't seen a plat map," I said. She rolled the window up. That was the 3rd time she stood on the edge of my land and told me my home was hers to manage. And it was the last. And I had every word of all 3 written down. Incident 22. The suit was filed the next month. Pinewood Ridge, through its attorney, sought an injunction to compel removal of my outbuilding and to recover the accrued fines. By then, a fictional figure north of $6,000. I read the complaint the way I read everything, slowly, with a pen. The whole thing rested on the claim that my parcel was subject to the association's covenants. It cited no recorded instrument placing it there because none exists. They were asserting jurisdiction the way Diane asserted it on my gravel, by saying it firmly and hoping no one checked. I checked. I had been checking for a year. The folder by then held the recorded deed, the recorded plat, the closed permit card on the shed. 26 logged incidents, time-stamped video of most of them. The fake inspector with the $19 shield. The Phase 2 application with the road drawn across my ground. And Ray Soto's notes from 3 separate visits. 26. I counted them at the kitchen table the night the suit came, laying each one out in a row across the wood, the photographs and the notices and the printed stills from Nora's videos, and Nora counted them with me, sliding each one to the left as we called the number out loud. 26, she said when we reached the end of the row. She looked at the table-covered edge-to-edge in paper. "That's a lot more than a handful, Grandpa." It was. The folder was heavy. Ray had said I would know, and I knew. The thing I hadn't deployed, the thing I had been holding the entire time, was not just the deed. Anyone can wave a deed. Half the men I red tagged over the years waved something at me. What I had was the other half of the story, the half about their clubhouse, and the reason I had kept quiet about it for 2 years. When Pinewood Ridge built its clubhouse the summer before all of this began, I had still been on the county's part-time call list, doing occasional inspections to fill the gap when the office ran short. I caught the clubhouse slab inspection. I walked it. And I found the footings under depth for the frost line and the rebar spacing wrong. And I red-tagged the pour and wrote it up and told the site super it could not be signed off until it was corrected. The correction never happened. Instead, the permit went quiet. And a few weeks later, the building went up anyway, on the bad slab. And someone, I never proved who, marked the permit closed in the county system without a final inspection ever being performed. I had retired fully by then. I filed my copy of the red tag in my folder, the way I file everything, and I said nothing, because it was no longer my job, and a man should not go looking for fights. A man should keep his records, though. And the red tag I had written, with my signature and the date and the failed items listed, was still in my folder, and the county's own system still showed that slab as never having passed a final, no matter what someone had typed into the closed permit field. The clubhouse Diane held her board meetings in, the clubhouse that was the pride of her community standard, was the one structure on that entire ridge that was actually illegal. And the proof was a document I had written myself with my own hand, 2 years before she ever drove up my road. The hearing on the injunction was set for a Thursday in March, in the county building where I had worked for 3 decades, 2 floors down from the office where I used to hang my keys. I wore a clean shirt. I brought the folder, the heavy one, with everything ordered by date and tabbed. Nora came, in the good coat she saves for things that matter, and she sat with her hands folded and her chin up. Ray Soto came too, off duty, sitting in the back in plain clothes because, he said, he wanted to see how it came out. And because a man likes to watch a thing he helped build actually stand. Diane sat at the front in a fresh magenta blazer with her attorney on one side and Greg on the other. The first time I had seen the two of them in the same room. Greg was a heavy man in a good jacket who kept checking his phone, the way a man does when he is used to the important room being somewhere else. Diane looked confident. She had spent a year being told no by a quiet man and had decided quiet meant beaten. And she sat there in the front row of a courtroom in a building I knew better than my own basement. Certain the firmness that had carried her through 9 years of board meetings would carry her through this. Their attorney went first and made the jurisdiction argument, smooth and short. The way you make an argument you have decided not to look at too closely. Pinewood Ridge covenants, community standard, the ridge as part of the development's natural footprint. He used the word functionally once. I almost smiled. Then Judge Hollis, a practical woman who had been on that bench longer than Diane had been president and had read more plat maps than Diane had read newsletters, looked over the top of her glasses at me and asked if I wished to respond. I did not make a speech. I have heard men make speeches in that room, and I have watched the speeches lose every time. Because a speech is a performance, and the paper is a fact, and a courtroom is the one place on earth built to tell the difference. I stood up. I walked to the clerk's table where the judge could see, and I laid 3 things down, one at a time, flat. So the laying down was its own kind of sentence. The first was my deed, recorded in 1991, with the legal description that placed my parcel above the old fence line and outside any subdivision boundary. I set it down, and I said, "This is the recorded deed to my parcel. It was recorded in 1991. It predates the Pinewood Ridge plat by 18 years. The association's covenants have never been recorded against this land, because this land is not theirs. The judge drew it toward her and read it, the actual legal description, line by line, taking her time. She nodded once, to herself. The second was the recorded plat of Pinewood Ridge itself, the association's own founding document, with the boundary drawn plain along the fence line. I laid it beside the deed, so the two lines sat next to each other on the table. This is the plat that created their subdivision. Their own surveyor, hired by their own developer, drew the boundary at the bottom of my slope. Everything above that line is mine and always has been. They are asking this court to enforce their covenants on ground their own map puts outside their reach. Nobody in the room said anything, said. Diane had stopped looking confident. Greg had put his phone in his pocket. The third thing I laid down was the red tag. I set it next to the Phase 2 application so the two papers touched. The failed inspection and the road across my land, side by side, because they were the same story, and I wanted the judge to see them as one. I kept my voice level, because the paper did not need help. I spent 31 years as a building inspector for this county. 2 summers ago, working the county's part-time call list, I inspected the slab poured for the association's own clubhouse. I found the footings under depth for our frost line and the rebar spacing out of spec, and I red-tagged the pour and wrote it up and signed it. And I told the site superintendent it could not pass until it was corrected. The correction was never made. The building went up on the bad slab anyway. It was occupied, and the permit was marked closed in the county system without any final inspection ever being performed, which this county's own records will confirm to this day. The structure the association holds its meetings in, the one they call the pride of the community, is the single building on that ridge that does not meet code. And this, I touched the plat application, is their plan for 20 more lots. With the only access road drawn straight across the strip of my deeded land, they have spent a year and 26 documented incidents trying to bully me into surrendering. I did not say one word more. I went back to my chair and I sat down next to Nora. And she moved her hand half an inch so the side of it touched the side of mine. And we waited. There is a particular silence that falls in a courtroom when the paper has done its work, and every person in the room understands it at the same moment. The lawyers and the clerk and the woman in the magenta blazer all arriving together at a thing they cannot now unknow. It lasted long enough that I could hear the clock on the back wall, the same clock that had hung there when I worked in the building, counting off the seconds the way it always had. Diane's attorney leaned over and whispered to her, "Fast," and she shook her head once, small, and Greg was looking at the table. Judge Hollis let the quiet sit. She was in no hurry. The paper was on her table, and it was not going anywhere. Then she ruled from the bench. She found that my parcel was not subject to the association's covenants, that the fines had been assessed without any authority and were void in their entirety, and she denied the injunction. She noted for the record that the matter of the clubhouse permit would be referred to the county building department, and the matter of a person impersonating a county inspector to the district attorney. She thanked me, by name, for the clarity of the record. Ray Soto in the back did not smile. But he wrote something in his own notebook and closed it. The numbers, when they landed clean. In 1 year, the association had filed 26 documented acts of harassment against me, levied over $6,000 in fines, paid an attorney to file a suit, and collected exactly $0, because every dollar of it was void from the first notice taped to my gate. My deed had been recorded 33 years before the morning of that hearing. One side of the ledger said 0. The other side said everything they had spent and everything they had claimed. You could stand in that room and point to both with your 2 hands and feel the whole distance between them. The consequences arrive the way consequences do when a person builds them themselves. The county pulled the clubhouse certificate of occupancy pending a real inspection, and the real inspection failed, the way I had said it would 2 years earlier. And the building was closed until the slab could be corrected at the association's expense, which ran to a figure that made $6,000 look like a rounding error. The Phase 2 application was denied for lack of legal access across the strip, which was mine and which I was never going to sell. Greg Talley's company, which had been quietly carrying the cost of the lots it had already cleared for the second phase, did not survive the delay. The district attorney's office took its time, the way they do, but the fake inspector eventually pleaded to a misdemeanor, and Greg's role in sending him became part of a record that did Talley Development no favors with the county on anything else it ever tried to file. Diane resigned the presidency that summer. Not because anyone forced her out, but because the board, looking at the legal bills and the condemned clubhouse and the dead second phase, finally asked the question she had spent 9 years making sure no one asked, which was whether she had ever actually had the authority she kept claiming. The answer was in the plat. It had been in the plat the whole time. The newsletter stopped running items about ridgeline aesthetic continuity. I cannot say I was sorry to see them go. I never got a knock on the door and an apology, and I did not expect one. People like Diane do not apologize, because to apologize they would first have to read the deed, and reading the deed is the one thing they will not do. The document apologized for her. The judge's order apologized for her. That was enough. That was always going to have to be enough. The spring after the hearing, Nora and I took the old phone down off the kitchen windowsill because there was nothing left coming up the road to record. She kept the videos anyway, all of them, copied to 2 drives, because I had taught her that and because she is the kind of person who finishes what she starts. She is 17 now, and talking about studying surveying of all things, the work of walking a line on the ground and matching it to the line on the paper. I told her it is honest work. I did not tell her how much it would have meant to her grandmother to hear her say it. Some things you keep in the folder of your own chest. In the evenings, I still sit on the porch Carol placed to catch the afternoon light, and the shed she made me promise to build sits squared and permitted at the edge of the yard, the tools inside it dry and in their places, and below the slope, the old fence line runs along the boundary exactly where the surveyor drew it in 1991, exactly where the deed says it runs. Nobody comes up to argue about it anymore. The light comes off the valley the way she said it would. Here is the lesson, because I promised you one at the start, and a promise is a kind of document too. When somebody with a clipboard tells you that your land is functionally theirs, do not argue and do not panic. Go to the county and pull your deed and pull the plat and read them, actually read them, and find the line that says where your ground stops and theirs begins. Keep a folder. Date everything. Photograph every notice the day it appears and keep 2 copies in 2 places. When an officer tells you a complaint has to be answered, believe him and give him the pattern he needs instead of the anger he does not. You do not beat organized authority by shouting louder than it. You beat it by being right on paper and patient enough to wait for the room where paper counts. The deed does not raise its voice. It does not have to. If you have stood at your own gate while somebody told you your home was theirs to manage, tell me about it below, because I read those, and there is always somebody in the comments who needed to hear they are not the only one. Subscribe if you want to stay for the rest of these, because there are more. And the next one is about a retired pipeline welder whose HOA tried to condemn the only well on the mountain, not knowing the water right attached to it had been filed before the state itself drew the county. Take care of your records. I will see you on the next one.